I love regional forms, bringing a fresh look to old Pokemon. It's always fun, and it lets more people find love in older Pokemon. I mean, I like Vulpix and Ninetales, but their Alolan forms are just the most beautiful creatures ever. But then we got something further beyond in Galar, where they evolved into something completely different, or even further than before in the case of a few. But what about those poor Pokemon that never went further beyond? The Hoenn Linoons, the Cantonian Mr. Mimes left to rot, as their shinier counterparts get to strut their stuff. So I'm here to rectify that by giving them some new evolutions. For the most part, I tried to keep the general idea of the Pokemon in mind. Most of the regional forms kind of play off their regional form ideas, so I'm going to do that for the originals. We won't be going Gene Simmons for Hoenn Linoon, absolutely not. So let's begin with our kindly gentleman Mr. Mime. It's wild that Mr. Mime is such a popular choice for a Pokemon to use in the general Pokemon media. I mean, it's creepy and funny, and it deserves an Oscar for that Detective Pikachu performance. But in general, the evolution idea for it was quite simple. Galarian Mr. Mime is based off tap dancing and the chill, so Mr. Rime is a simple evolution idea. So for Cantonian, the idea was to follow that general idea of the junior to the older man to the senior. The first artwork I did for Mime Senior was a good start, and the concept stays generally the same, but the pose was off. I wanted it to hold a miming cane and have its hand behind its back like all good old people 30 years and older do thanks to their back. And it didn't look very old per se, so I gave it some more mustachioid looks to it, and then got started on the second version. I wanted to exaggerate the proportions of the Pokemon, bigger pants, mustache and hair, to help make the whole thing feel a little less balanced, as well as that completely hunched over look to really sell that senior look. I even tried to give it an almost suspender look to the body. I then desaturated the colours a bit more to get that really old feeling just stuck in there. Mime Senior, the elder Pokemon, a psychic and fairy type. It evolves from Mr. Mime after learning Teeter Dance. Mime Senior in comparison to many Pokemon is quite frail, but do not underestimate them. Their mind is honed and incredibly powerful, able to create constructs via their miming that go beyond that of even their pre-evolution. They walk around using a mimed cane that also doubles as a weapon. Although if a Pokemon is that close, if it hasn't been impeded by Mime Senior walls, then Mime Senior is in danger. It has a love for tea and has been seen making it in the wild with the help of grass, fire and water type Pokemon. Mime Senior's abilities are soundproof and filter. Legends Arceus did OG Quillfish dirty. Overquill may be very simple, being just an inflated, Splatoonified version of Hisuian Quillfish, but dang does it do it oh so well. I love both these, so I wanted to figure out a way to make Quillfish a little more interesting. I had two versions this time, and despised the first one. I wanted to make it look more like a bigger, spikier, dangerous Quillfish, where even its beak became spiky, but it all felt too awkward and weird and didn't change much about it, so I tossed it aside and started on a different version. Although I did like the idea of the tail. For the second version, I based it off an actual pufferfish called the dog-faced pufferfish, which scarily looks just like a dog. An inflatable dog with spikes, but that's just more of a general guard dog improvement. I also used the idea of Okidogi's toxic chains for Unquillable. The spikes on this Pokemon kind of follow the stereotypical underbite dog tooth, as well as emulating dog ears and legs, which would only show up when fully inflated. For colours, I tried to keep the general more subtle colours of Quillfish, and made them a little more purple, and added some browns to sell that dog aesthetic. If I had to change anything about this one, I think it's just make the shadows a little darker, but I'm pretty happy with how this one turned out. A bigger, meaner Quillfish pop. Unquillable, the warning Pokemon, a water and poison type. Evolves from Quillfish with a dust stone. Unquillable are quite the territorial Pokemon, claiming alcoves in the ocean as their own, and then vehemently defending them even so far as to kick their own young out once old enough. The spots on their body are actually spikes that they can extend independently, but once an Unquillable swells up they all come out, turning into a jagged fortress of toxic pain. It prefers to not swell up, but when startled or threatened it just can't help it, leading to some embarrassing moments for Unquillable. Unquillable has the abilities Poison Point and Guard Dog. Basculine Legion is a great idea, combining the aesthetics of the Hisuian and Japanese effects onto a big grumpy fish. But for regular red and blue Basculine, the idea was to not change the idea so much. I like the fact that Basculine's whole thing is just being mean and angry and all about fighting, so I wanted to just expound upon that, a larger scarred version that looks scary with big teeth and multiple fins. Almost mythological in a sense, but grounded enough to see it and think that it would be a late game water encounter. I worked on Red Stripe first for no real particular reason, but I wasn't going to do a whole different pose for Blue, as it is just going to have some minor differences, just like Basculine's red and blue form. The biggest change was swapping around the fin types, with Red having more basic, while Blue has the 3-pronged fins instead. As I was working, I felt there was one thing missing, and it dawned on me looking at other pics of Basculine that it was missing actual teeth. I mean, it has large fangs, good for ripping, but not smaller teeth, and I think that really pushed the idea of it over the finish line. This thing would totally fight not only the other form for territory, but Sharpedo as well for the big scary Water Dark King. Basculance, the vicious Pokemon, a dark and water type. It evolves from Basculine after defeating 20 Pokemon with recoil moves and surviving each time. Basculants are even more terrifying and hostile than Basculine, going to such great lengths as to clear out even massive ships from any territory they hold in the ocean. Their front fangs are so strong they can tear a ship's hull open with one crunch. Even their fins are hard enough to shear a rock in half. Basculants even have terrifying speeds thanks to their multiple fins. Red and blue Basculants fight great battles between each other for territory. Basculance's abilities is Reckless and Sheer Force. If I had seen a leak saying that Zigzagoon would get a Galarian form that turns it into a KISS member, I wouldn't have believed you, let alone that its final form is Gene Simmons' Persona. An interesting through line, but for Ho and Ziggy and Linoon, I wanted to continue the thought of a zigzag, then a line, and instead of essentially an obstruction stop, it'd continue onto a circle or loop. Essentially, I wanted to keep a similar look to Linoon and bring in some extra length without stepping too far into Farfetched territory. I also combined a bit of Floatzel and Typhlosion, especially for its build when bunched up. I originally was going to give it these long scythe-like claws, but it felt way too Sneasel. I think this evolution captures a pretty good early Pokemon Kaiju build as well, till it unfurls and is this super long, funny looking Gigantamax Meowth Slink raccoon creature. Maybe I could have a new powerful normal type move called Head Cannon or something silly like that. Aurora, the Slinky Pokemon, a normal type. It evolves from Linoon at level 35 during daytime. Aurora has an incredibly flexible spine, able to extend and contract to the point where it is almost comically long. The large ring around Aurora is where it holds much of its tension. When it needs to catch a faraway enemy, it will unfurl and launch towards the enemy with blinding speeds. In the wild, Aurora can use its large body to constrict and hold opponents while it bites down to finish off held prey. Raised Aurora will instead use this tricky tactic to hold trainers for hugs when they feel especially clingy. Ouroboros' abilities are Long Reach and Gluttony. Finally, the funky duck themselves, Farfetched. Galarian Farfetched gave us the noble duck Sirfetch'd, who surprisingly joined Ash in his final team, which is cool representation for the line, but OG Farfetch'd is kinda just a joke, really. It's there to be a food joke and be considered about eating, so why don't we just continue on with that thought and make it all about not being eaten per se, but cooking instead? The original sketch of Unheard Of was a little silly, being a very far from below shot, which made no sense as it isn't that tall. But it captured the idea rather well of Farfetch'd who had a grilled breast, their leeks slightly grilled and caked with some salt, that it uses as a bludgeon, and a crest that was gonna look like a chef's hat. I made the colours brown and white, but I didn't like the colours much, so I inverted in the second version. Let's take a look at that now. I started with a similar look except a longer duck-like neck, And the leek now has an extra part that I turn into an almost spoon like salt crystal instead. I found it funny to instead make the crest into this full-on Chef Zeph long chef hat that I think would work great as a floppy feather piece in game. It's got sort of a grumpy Gordon Ramsay look right now, but I think in the end, this turned out really fun and I think that makes a good Evo for Farfetched.
What are you? An idiot sandwich.
Unheard of. The Cook Pokemon, a normal and flying type. Evolves from Farfetched after being hit by either Flamethrower, Salt Cure, Crunch, Bite or Overheat 5 times. Unheard of has learned to make powerful foods from nature and uses this to dissuade predators from trying to devour it. It isn't very strong but will still fight using the cooked leek it has with very tough salt crystals embedded in it. The larger a crest an Unheard of has, the more popular it is, especially males who use this as a show towards their mates. The crest is also hollow within, where they will store ingredients for cooking later. They are quite the smart Pokemon. Unheard of has a new ability called Master Chef, which shares any healing this Pokemon gets with allies, and berries heal extra. So 5 new Evos for older Pokemon who just didn't get that love. What do you think? Comment your thoughts below and don't forget to chuck a like and sub if you haven't already. I appreciate you all. Next video, let's have our episode of Rugrats and All Grown Up all in one as we meet our new superpowered baby Pokemon and their new Evos. Thanks so much for watching and I'll see you next video.